Okay, so today we'll be doing an opening lab. We got a couple of questions from Patreon. Folks who subscribe at the $15 level can send in opening questions once per month, and they get covered on this show. We have 4 questions today, and it's actually a very special. Um, it's a very special version of the opening lab because my computer's hard drive also crashed recently, and I haven't had access to any of my chess-based files. So this will be me responding to the questions just based off of my memory and knowledge, a little bit off the cuff analysis perhaps, but yeah, I usually prepare for these. I usually look up, I go into the database and I see what players are playing, but today we're just gonna wing it, guys. We're just gonna wing it. But I think I looked at the questions. I think I can handle them. They're all kind of up my alley. Okay, so number one is from Always Double Check, who's in the chat. Very cool. What are your thoughts on the classical Dutch, in particular with the 1e6 move order? Personally, I find the Dutch a tough sell to play without the move order, as there are no less than 7 good sidelines for white on move 2. Simon Williams made this opening famous in the YouTube streaming world, but you cannot deny his results with it. For example, his win over Gelfand in 2012. Yeah, no, I wasn't gonna deny his results. I'm gonna give myself a time limit of 10 minutes per question so we can make sure we keep the show moving along here. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of most of the Dutches, but I do think I think the Leningrad Dutch is still just like a fully playable opening if you want something that's like sharp and unconventional. I think most of the Dutches are playable as it is. I wouldn't play them because I don't think they're solid enough. And I feel like I think I played the Leningrad once and I did okay with it, but it like the position is just suspicious. That's the best way I can put it. Like you just feel like, you get some dynamic play, but long term in these positions, I've always preferred white's kind of strategic pull. You just have this amazing bishop on this diagonal. When the center opens up, it's always black's king that ends up kind of, weakened. Of course, the story doesn't end there. There's a lot of theory in these positions, and um, you could definitely make the argument that the Dutch is actually still a pretty underrated system. Coming as a D4 player, the Dutch is not in like the top 5, 6, 7 openings that I'm looking at, right? I'm focusing most of my time on like the King's Indian, the Grunfeld, the Queen's Gambit Decline, the Slav, maybe either the Nimzo or the Queen's Indian. I'm gonna look at the Benoni and the Benko probably before I look at the Dutch. So the Dutch kind of like, I have some prep against it. I know what I'm doing, but like as you go down the rating levels, especially D4 players are going to be less and less prepared against it. So I'm sure you can get away with playing most of the Dutches. It really comes down to, and I think I say this at least once every opening lab, just finding positions that you feel comfortable playing. For instance, like, the Stonewall is a perfectly playable Dutch. I mean, Magnus played it like multiple times. It's not like something he played once and then never played again. He played it multiple times knowing people were going to prepare for him. And lots of grandmasters are, I think, still playing the Stonewall. So I'm sure theoretically it's viable. But it's not everyone is going to be happy playing that position. Like, I take one look at it and, I cringe because I used to play the French, and it's like, here, let's build an even worse French than before. So that's kind of how I see it, but obviously it's a very playable system, and that's just my own personal bias of, not liking the French anymore. So all of these Dutches, I think in general are playable, and there's lots of good repertoires out there, and there's guys like Simon Williams, and what's the other one I'm thinking of? I think it's the guy, isn't it the guy who also wrote the Wonderful Winnower and like the Fabulous French? Isn't he a Dutch guy as well? Who am I thinking of, guys? Starts with an M. Oh boy, I'm running out of time. Moisenko. Moskalenko, thank you, Moskalenko. Yeah, he's a big Dutch guy, right? So there's lots of good like Dutch repertoires and specialists out there. I think, yeah, there's a repertoire on like Chess 24 with the Dutch by Grandmaster Prusers. or Roland. Um, so you can make any Dutch playable, but again, the key question is like, do you enjoy playing those middle games? Because the middle games are going to be kind of sketchy, and they're not going to be for everyone. Some players can really make it work, but again, not everyone. So that's going to be kind of the big thing. And in my experience, uh, even if someone is playing the Dutch, they're not always playing it well. So you really have to. It's just a tough opening, I think, to make work. But if you like it, then it can absolutely do you wonders. So the question was, I think, about the classical Dutch, which I'm going to assume is the lines where black goes like bishop e7, castles, and d6, which, yeah, I believe is like Simon Williams's favorite. So I haven't looked at the theory in this in a little while. The last thing I remember was in this position, black was mainly trying this queen e8, queen h5 plan, which is, I think, pretty typical. And this move rook e1 was very, very promising from white's point of view. I looked at it a little bit, like maybe last year or so, and this was kind of the main like theoretical problem as far as I could see, where white just tries to play very quick e4. And I think there's like some knight h4, knight g5 ideas. I don't remember the exact details of all this, but as far as I remember, this was kind of difficult for black to deal with because they put the queen on g6, they always get hit with knight h4 in these lines. So it's a little bit awkward. And if white can just break with e4, then like the rook opens up and the bishop opens up, and it's generally pretty unpleasant for black. I think maybe like knight e4 was a move here. And yeah, I would say this is the line to kind of investigate if you're curious about the theory. But again, most players are not going to really know the theory. They're just going to play normal moves. They're going to play like queen c2, rook b1, b4, b5, knight d2, knight e1. And so it's really just a matter of like, are you going to feel comfortable, playing the position? And what I would suggest is like, just flip the board, take a look at it, play some training games, and then you can determine from that if you feel like it's going to be the right opening for you. So yeah, always double check. Do you feel like that answers your question? Awesome. Oh, Ian is saying 95. I think 92 very dangerous for black, followed by after. Maybe I'm not really sure. Black has other ways of playing the system as well. There's like knight c6 moves and things like that. And yeah, I mean, again, it just comes down to if you feel comfortable playing the positions or not. Well, cool. Let's reset the clock, and I will move on to the next question. And yeah, as you mentioned, there's a lot of sidelines. I mean, lots of players just play it with this move order. Of course, the big drawback of starting with e6 is that you have to allow a French. But if that's part of your repertoire, then obviously that's not a problem. And the thing that d4 players usually do is like, even though they might feel comfortable playing a French, they'll still won't play e4 here just out of principle because they're like, well, I'm not an e4 player, so I don't know if I can really do this. Even though it's like for a lot of players, the reason they don't play e4 is because maybe they don't like dealing with the Sicilian, or maybe they don't like dealing with e4, e5. Very few people switch away from e4 because of the French. But still, if you play e6 or d6 against the d4 player, they very rarely are willing to transpose into an e4 opening, which I think is a possible wasted opportunity. But okay, let's go to our next question here. This is from Ian. Whoops, I scrolled too far. From Ian Lamb, longtime supporter, who's in the chat. What's the best way for black to meet the bishop b5 Rossolimo in the Sicilian Najdorf? Okay, I think we're probably talking about the Moscow variation. At least I think that's what it's called. And yeah, I assume we're talking about this position. Is that right? Okay, cool. Yeah, so as far as I remember, there's no like best move here, but you have kind of two main options, bishop d7 and knight d7, and these kind of have their pros and cons. Long story short, unless you kind of like dragon structures, bishop d7 will often get into a type of Marazzi, because one of the popular ways for white to play is to go like c4 in these types of positions. So unless you specifically want to play some kind of accelerated dragon structure, I would say if you're a Najdorf player, you're probably going to feel more comfortable with knight d7. So long story short, if you're a Najdorf player playing this move order, I think knight d7 is the move. If you're a dragon player and you feel more comfortable with like a dragon structure, then I would go for bishop d7 and on takes. I think taking with the queen is considered the main line. And then white has lots of options here. It's not like they have to play for the c4 Marazzi structure. They can also like castle and go rook e1 and c3 d4. So there's different lines here, but generally black is fianchettoing the bishop and playing this kind of setup. But I think, Ian, you were asking from Najdorf point of view. Is that right? So I think the question said, yeah, in the Sicilian Najdorf. Yeah. So I would say focus on this one. As far as I remember, this is the move that MVL usually plays. And MVL is, of course, a big Najdorf guy. So it makes sense to follow the top guys. I'm sure lots of Najdorf players have played both moves by this point, but yeah, knight d7 just seems like the more dynamic choice. This is also the choice of Topalov in this famous game where he beat Magnus with this like that g5 move. Forget how that line went exactly. Maybe you guys can help me out. It was like castles, knight f6. I want to say rook e1, a6, bishop d3, and like g5, like something like this. And so if you find this kind of line fun and playable, which I hope you would, because I think it is a lot of fun, then yeah, this is like the kind of stuff you could be exploring. Oh, Grandmaster Kolovic recommends bishop d7 and then taking with the knight. Oh, that's interesting, because actually, as far as I had like studied these positions, which is not that much to be honest, I've always thought that this was considered the main line. So it's interesting that he's recommending this one, because I'm sure he's done his work there. So that might be an interesting new choice to consider as well. So yeah, there's also knight c6, which I have seen some players play, but I guess what's wrong with knight c6 is that if we go to the Rossolimo move order with bishop to b5, black's two main moves here have always been g6 and e6. And maybe there's like other moves as well, like maybe knight f6 or like queen c7 or some weird moves, but d6 has always been like a clear third in this position, right? So if d6 is only the third best move here, maybe the third best move, like g6 and e6 are so much better, then why in this position, would you go for this kind of third rate option, right? It's like, it doesn't really make sense. So most players should, I think, be choosing between bishop d7 and knight d7. So yeah, I would go for this one, long story short, and I think knight gf6, and here white has a lot of options. I think rook e1 is the main one, but there actually rook e1 I think is kind of overwhelmingly the main line, and then on a6 there's like different options here. There's bishop d3, bishop f1. I think there's even this weird move bishop c4 where maybe this isn't the right position, but white kind of induces this move b5 and then pulls back and tries to, I feel like this isn't the right place where they do it, but you will meet some funky move orders like this. A lot of times these positions, especially with the bishop going to f1, they actually turn into more of a Rui Lopez. So you're not exactly going to be getting a Najdorf here. In a lot of these lines, black is playing either e6 or e5. The bishop is going to e7. You're castling. This bishop is going to b7. And essentially, it's a Rui Lopez, but it's, well, supposed to be a very playable Rui. And yeah, that's already a solid opening to begin with. Well, okay, Ian, I think that's about all of the educated things I can say, but let me know if you have any any follow-up questions on anything I mentioned. Yeah, and I mean, this should just be kind of like a constant disclaimer. Like most openings are playable at most levels. So it's all about like what you feel is gonna work for you. Cool. In that case, let's go to our next question, which is from Vishnu. And Vishnu asks, what's a good line in the King's Indian against the Saemisch? And okay, so last thing I saw on Vishnu's Twitter was that he lost this game in the King's Indian Saemisch. So I think that might have might have inspired this question. I feel like I've probably answered this before on Patreon, so um, you might be able to go back and find it, Vishnu, in previous videos, which you should have access to as a $15 subscriber. I'm pretty sure I've given my recommendation, but I'm happy to kind of update it as I'm still in the club. I'm still in the cult, the King's Indian cult. No, not knight f3. Of course, we're talking about the Saemisch f3. So okay, most players here castle. I think that's kind of standard, and now white has the choice to begin with. There's knight e2, bishop g5, and then probably the main line, as most people consider it, bishop e3. Though these other moves are definitely worth considering. I personally like knight e2 in this position as white. I play this a lot so that I can keep the bishop flexible. And some players opt for bishop g5 here, which in my experience just leads to a slightly different type of position compared to the bishop e3 lines, but pretty similar overall, because black is often just playing c5 here and going for Benoni structure, as they often do against bishop e3 as well. But let's focus on bishop e3, because I think this is the main way people play it, and kind of fundamental idea of the Saemisch is that white wants to play queen d2, castle queenside, bishop h6, h4, and just treat it like a Yugoslav attack. I mean, that's not how everyone plays it, but that's how many players think of this line, because the setup looks extremely similar to the Sicilian and Perkin stuff. I mean, the only difference is the pawn is on c4 instead of on c2, which I think actually is in black's favor, because it gives black an easier time of attacking the queen side. Okay, so main line here is usually considered c5, and I would say the only drawback to this move is the endgame after dc. Now theoretically this endgame stands perfectly fine. After takes, bishop takes c5. And if you know the theory here, I think you're okay as black. You get compensation, you play knight c6, then knight d7. This knight often comes to e5, this bishop can go to like a6 or b7, and you get nice long-term compensation in this endgame. And if I had to pick a side, honestly, like, I think I would rather take black here, because I kind of like playing with the initiative. But this isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea, and honestly, like, maybe I'm just giving away trade secrets, but if I'm playing against like a well-prepared 2200 player, then I don't want to go into this endgame, because if they're well-prepared, like, they can probably find a position where they're very safe, you know, forcing a draw. There are some theoretical lines that just end up in a very, very like drawish, like opposite color bishop endgame. So yeah, I mean, as someone who plays down in open tournaments and trying to play for a win, I personally don't like giving this option to low rated opponents. Against a high rated player, you know, I'm also scared, because their endgame technique is going to be really good, and who knows, maybe they'll find, you know, it's not the type of position I want to play. So what I've been doing is playing this move b6, which I think is actually a pretty good choice, all things considered. The idea is to play c5 and get this Benoni anyway, but with the b pawn, okay, we're not worried about d takes c5 in any position. There's a couple different ways this can go, but essentially we're going to be getting a Benoni one way or the other. Now it's up to white if they want to play d5 here or not. A lot of players, they just kind of play d5 on autopilot, and then we'd go e6 and immediately go for this Benoni structure. Some players might play knight e2 here, which also makes sense, because if we take and knight takes d4, we're getting Marazzi structure where black already committed to b6. Not necessarily the best move. It's actually a theoretical position if the pawn was on b7. Now I know Vishnu is an accelerated dragon guy, so he's probably okay with Marazzi, but not every King's Indian player is going to be. So black's idea, if white does not push d5, is to play bishop a6. And we can get into the theory here a little bit. I think it would be easier actually just to look up a database and you'll see what black is doing. But the main point is to very obnoxiously attack this pawn. If white moves the knight to defend it, then we take here, and it's definitely not a great Marazzi when we get like knight c6 and we get all these tempos. The knight on g3, not going to be well placed here. So white would probably go b3, and then black plays this move e6, which is a very, I think, useful move, because the idea is to prepare knight c6, and then when white is pushing d5, we're already ready to capture, and we get our Benoni structure. I think we should come back to this one. So what usually happens is white will just play d5 here. In one way, shape, or form. You know, maybe they'll play knight e2 in this position, and then you go c5, and then they'll go d5 here. Essentially, we're getting a very similar type of structure. We're always playing e6 here and just taking basically first possible chance. So yeah, I mean, the critical thing here is going to be feeling comfortable with playing this kind of position. One thing that I often get is white playing knight e2 here, because this is just kind of where the knight usually goes, knight g3, bishop e2. And then we take, and we go bishop a6. And we prepare to trade off the light squared bishops. It's kind of maybe the most important idea in this whole system for black, is to play this bishop a6 and trade off this bishop. Because the Benoni, the main problem with the Benoni is the space. Especially like this d7 square, you have like literally 3, sometimes 4 pieces if you count the queen, fighting for this one square, and so black doesn't have room for all of their pieces. So when we get to trade off the bishop, it actually becomes immediately a much better Benoni, and white has to lose time castling. So in this position, I mean, I already prefer black. And this is the type of position where you can also just consider playing b5, because we're just ahead in development. And yeah, you can analyze this a little bit. I would suggest looking at this kind of stuff with your engines. But black often just gets like huge counterplay here. Rook b8, queen a6, knight e5, knight d3. It's just like a Benko, you know, on fire, basically. Very good version, with especially this knight e5 always threatening knight c4, and yeah, very risky for white. So this is just the type of ideas black should be looking for. But even if you played it slower, like you could play c4 here, and knight e5, knight d3, or knight c5. I already think the position is extremely good for black. Like I would take black here in a heartbeat. So this is kind of what we're playing for with the system, a good Benoni. And if you get a good Benoni, you can really crush a lot of players. I've definitely won a lot of games in this structure. Yeah, so I would recommend going for this one. I think it's a pretty fun way for black to play. And in general, I always thought like the Benoni is the right way to deal with the Saemisch, because this is the one that really makes it hard for white to castle queenside. Like if white castles queenside in these types of positions, they're just going to get killed because his bishop is so strong. I mean, the Benoni is just usually very dangerous. And you won't get a lot of players who castle queenside, but you will get some, because that's just what they've been taught to do. They're like, okay, in the Saemisch, I play d5, and then I play like a Yugoslav attack. And then they just castle, and then go h4, g4, and then they just get killed because you play e6 and you blow them out of the water. Compare this to the positions that a lot of players go for with e5. And here, okay, it does make sense for white to castle queenside, obviously, because the bishop is blocked. So I think this one simple difference actually makes a huge difference. And yeah, this is why I often prefer to go for these c5 structures in these lines. Vishnu, you're also going to want to check out this new line that I don't know much about, but is actually very interesting. Starting with knight d7, and then a6, and I think they just go b5 in these positions. You got to check the theory here, but check like the most recent games if you can, with like knight d7, a6, b5. I think there's some really interesting stuff there. Yeah. Okay, looks like we are out of time. So let's go to the final question. Just gonna keep it rolling here. Final question is from Laurent. Which lines would you recommend as viable surprise weapons against the 9 castles Yugoslav attack? A, up to 2000 elo, and B, in the 2000 to 2200 range. Okay, I like how he doesn't even say the dragon. Laurent, he trusts me. He knows that I know what he's talking about. This is an interesting question. And yeah, all right, I guess we'll have to answer it. I don't want to give away everything, but you know what? We're just gonna have to. So let's reset. Okay, so yeah, we're talking about the dragon today. Bishop e3, bishop g7, f3, castles, queen d2, knight c6. Okay, you guys all know the story here. Bishop c4 was the main move for a while. It's still a very popular move, but castles has become kind of the modern main line, or the move that most modern players are often tending towards, as if the main point behind just castling early is that if black plays like the typical dragon stuff with bishop d7 and rook c8 and knight e5, then when the knight goes to c4 and white just takes it, then white is saving like 2 whole moves, because they're not playing bishop c4, bishop b3, and then taking on c4. They're just taking on c4 in 1 move. In fact, this is so good for white that a lot of players will even play bishop e2 here. As far as I remember, a very accurate move, strengthening the structure, not allowing any funky sacrifices. So white will even give back 1 tempo just to play this position where they're a tempo ahead of the other main line with bishop c4 and b3. And then we go h5 here, and it's big problems for black. So yeah, most players just consider d5 here to be the kind of overwhelming main line. And I would say, although theoretically this line is holding up well, I think in most cases, the drawback for this one for black is that now white has like a million options they can choose. They have like queen e1, which I recommended in my book a few years ago, that I think is still a pretty dangerous system. There's king b1, and then there's like all of the lines with e takes d5 and knight c6. So these lines like take, and bishop d4. And I think this line now might have become the new main line again, because I think Caruana was playing this one recently. And anything that Fabiano Caruana plays with white, especially multiple times, should be considered very seriously, if not just the outright main line. So this one is also kind of a bummer for black, because they're worse after e5. So if they want to equalize, they have to take on d4. This is how Naka will play it as black and go for this endgame. But white doesn't allow them to play that endgame. They go knight a4, and if black wants to take on d4, then they end up in this kind of sad position where their queenside structure is worse and white is just strategically better. So then black has to go queen c7, and then okay, the theory continues from here, and it's kind of, I think it's kind of unclear what's happening. But to me, it feels like white has a pleasant advantage here, at least in practice. So what Laurent is asking is like, what to do, because he wants something playable where he's not just getting like a worse position with black, and something, yeah, where like he can still play his dragon and not worry about getting killed with theory here. So we're gonna have to figure something out. There are some options. Now, the main thing is that in this question, the word viable is going to be doing a lot of work here. Because viable, you know, we can stretch that word a lot. What does that mean exactly? Does that mean, you know, you could play it against an unsuspecting opponent? Because then a lot of stuff is viable. Does viable mean like you can play it against people who know you're gonna play it and have like, you know, a day or two to prep for you? That might be less viable. So we're gonna have to be pretty precise with our words here. But there are some options. Let's see. Personally, I feel like the way to play in the under 2000 range would be to delay castling. Not a lot of people do it, but I think it's pretty reasonable. You can play knight c6 here, queen d2, and just play your other dragon moves. Just play bishop d7, and then rook c8. And then you can kind of muck around. You know, if they go h4, g4, maybe you hit them with h5, since your rook is on the h-file, and that's kind of a much stronger position. And if they mess around on the queen side too much, well then maybe at one point you just castle king side and you transpose into a version of this that's not so bad. So this is where I would be kind of exploring, you know, trying to see if you can trick your opponents in this kind of position. Maybe they play h4 here and then you play h5. And it's like, now what? What are you going to do? What are you going to do, right? Like, and you just play like rook c8, a6, kind of start playing like Najdorf style, right? Knight e5, queen a5. Black has a lot of moves you can make here. And again, against an unsuspecting opponent who's like never seen this before in their life, who's just used to playing like g4, h5 in every position, especially kids who are kind of taught like this one plan, the Yugoslav Attack, and that's just kind of what they play in every game. They're going to be really confused what to do here. They're going to do some silly stuff. They're going to play bishop d3, you'll go rook c8, they'll castle kingside. I don't know. No, they'll still castle queenside. You go knight e5, you know, maybe they play like f4 and then give you the g4 square. I mean, it's risky. You know, we have to be clear here. It's definitely a risky way for black to play. But if you're looking to create winning chances, you know, you do have to take some amount of risk as black. So this would be kind of the first place that I start looking. Let's go back a bit because there are a couple other options as well. The other option, you know, let's say you're committed to castling here and playing this position. So yeah, these bishop d7 lines are playable. It's not like you're just dead lost after h4, but they're risky. So a well-prepared opponent here is gonna cause you some grief. The other line that's always been considered a pretty risky option is knight takes d4 and bishop e6. I mean, honestly, this one is like straight up refuted at this point. I want to say it's just like, it's very bad for black if white knows their stuff, but they do have to know quite a bit of theory. So if you're pretty sure your opponent is not going to know the theory here, then it's actually a pretty dangerous system. And the idea here is that we just want to go queen a5, rook fc8, rook ab8, and then b5. So you launch this very, very fast counterattack, and it's actually a very dangerous line. So like, especially if, I don't know, you're playing a blitz game and it's not like a serious tournament game, you're playing like blitz and rapid, and you think your opponent isn't going to know the theory, this is actually a very reasonable choice. I would say take the risk and just go for it. Like, who's going to know 18 moves of theory here and know all the tactics at the end to like beat you? Like, very, very unlikely. Maybe you can even do it up to 2200 range. I mean, in the book, we covered this position with white, and we laid out exactly what white should do. Since the book is written, I think now there's actually 2 lines that kind of kill this. But again, white has to know a lot to make it work. So unofficially, I would say this line is kind of dead if a player is well prepared, but that's just kind of the, you know, the risk you're taking. So yeah, that's the, again, it's all about like, you know, it's pros and cons. So if you high reward, high risk, of course, that's kind of how it works. Now for Laurent's sake, I won't mention exactly what white should do here, but if you look up a database or if you look up a good repertoire that has this, then hopefully it shows you how white should deal with this. But if white doesn't know, then yeah, it's a very dangerous system because black's counterplay comes very quickly. Again, queen a5, rook fc8, rook ab8, b5, b4, it's very, very fast. So this is actually a line where like one wrong move for white, they end up in a worse position. So there is a very high reward to this. Again, one wrong move for white and they end up in trouble. So yeah, those are basically your 3 options. You can take a risk with bishop d7, which I would say not my favorite choice. You can take a risk with knight takes d4, which I think is playable as long as very playable as long as your opponent isn't a theory junkie. Or if if they have like a week to prepare for you and they already know this is your repertoire, then yeah, it's not exactly viable. It's a good surprise weapon, but not viable for more than one game. Although Laurent did say, what would you recommend as viable surprise weapons? Okay, so maybe that implies you're only going to be playing this like, every once in a while. In that case, yeah, it's definitely a viable surprise weapon, but not something that you can probably do as your main repertoire. But what I would really investigate is these kind of weird move orders, where like maybe just play h5 in this position. Because maybe you're worried like, oh, if I play bishop d7, white will go g4 first, and then go like h4. Maybe you just play h5 here. Like you could try this for one game. I don't think your opponents are gonna know like how to just crush this. Then you go bishop d7, rook c8, and if they really dilly daddle for too long, don't make any good moves, maybe just go king f8, king g8, right? You just don't let them attack, right? You just play something that's a little bit different than what they're normally doing, and yeah, you can confuse a lot of opponents. So this would maybe be my choice as kind of an overall thing where, yeah, even if they can prepare for you, it's not even going to be that easy to figure it out because you can always kind of switch up the move order. All right, guys, Neil Bruce is indeed correct. It is movie time. So we're going to be wrapping up the opening lab here. But don't go anywhere. We're going to set up the stream real quick. And then we're going to be doing a very special Dojo Talks Cinema edition where we'll be ranking all the movies. If you want to see what we're going to be ranking, I put it up on Discord and Twitter. So that's going to be, you can check out the list of films. And yeah, not all of us have seen everything. So for some of the films, it's going to be just David or just Jesse or just me. But we'll ask for your input as well, because maybe you guys will have some good opinions. And obviously we're going to be talking about the Queen's Gambit because that's been the talk of the town. Yes. But yeah, right, I'm going to close out the stream for now so people can enjoy the VOD later. Hopefully you guys learned something. Once again, this opening lab is something we offer for patrons at the $15 tier once a month. If you want to get your questions answered on show, then sign up for our Patreon. That's how to do it. All right, guys, I will be seeing you all in a couple minutes. Catch y'all soon.